A teenage rock band solving crimes between gigs. A bongo-playing dog named Too Much. All with the title, Mysteries 5. How did this concept become the Scooby-Doo we all know today?
Looks like we got a real mystery on our hands this time.
When Scooby was being developed, I was vice president of daytime programs for CBS, which included the children's schedule on the weekends. ABC put an animated version of the Beatles on and just beat the daylights out of CBS. This was a situation that had to be turned around, with original programming. And at that point in time, there was only one studio to go to for really dependable material, and that was Hanna-Barbera.
Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera had produced theatrical cartoons for MGM for years, and the theatrical cartoon market had dried up, so they started producing them for television with Rough and Ready and Huckleberry Hound and Quick Draw McGraw. And they had Frankenstein Jr. and The Impossibles on CBS.
Joe Barbera and Bill Hanna also were extremely creative guys. They came out of Tom and Jerry and did all those wonderful shorts. They did Yogi Bear and the Flintstones and Top Cat and the Jetsons.
I figured the way to beat the Beatles was to move on to the next thing. And my feeling was that the next major move was going to be comedy adventure. To take the basic adventure form, but put a twist on it.
Well, what was really original about Scooby-Doo at the time was to find that strange little niche between a heavy adventure show like Johnny Quest and a funny show like Huckleberry Hound. It wasn't either genre.
The mixture of those genres has been a staple in entertainment for years. Going back to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Never been done on Saturday morning and never been done in animation. If we could capture the essence of what Abbott and Costello did, then we would end up with a big hit.
We were writers at Hanna-Barbera. Our development time was like throwing Joe Barbera a bunch of ideas, come in, and trying to figure out what the network was looking for, etc.
Well, Fred Silverman said he wanted to do a show with teenagers, and he wanted it to be a comedy mystery.
Sort of either the Archie kids or like Dobie Gillis. So out we went. And then Joe said, Freddie likes dogs. Let's see if we can put a dog in it, too.
So we came up with a group of kids that were musicians, and we had the dog, which we called Too Much. Too Much was not a coward because it was a different situation. He was a bongo player, and they were just one of these musical groups that would travel around, and they'd fall into these mysteries.
So we called the group the Mystery Five, and we typed up a presentation for Fred. I'll never forget this. We typed it up, and we had it shipped over to the Beverly Hills Hotel for him to read. And it was all that spooky night and, stormy and ghosts and, all this kind of stuff. Well, we found out he read it like at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we thought, oh, God.
And Fred says, don't like the dog and get rid of the band.
And Fred hated the title Mysteries 5. And it was like, you just saw that all this enthusiasm for the show was going right down the drain because you didn't have a title. And then finally, Fred says, we talked about doing a show with Bob Denver, and it was going to be called Who's Scared? We all went, great idea, Fred. That's a terrific title. And so it became Who's Scared?
What happens is that because certain things changed, characters suddenly do things that you don't expect them to do. And Scooby and Shaggy became the team. And they were both cowards.
Shaggy and Scooby, again, came out of the Bob Hope thing, which is we're making both Bob Hope scaredy cat kind of guys, but they always were heroic.
They're not going to hide when their friends are going to be creamed by this horrible monster. They're going to try to do something. As stupid it is, they're going to do something. And they were like two peas in the pod, and they were always, having fun with each other. So that changed the dynamics of the show. They all had a shtick. Daphne, she was a bad luck, danger-prone Daphne, where she'd do something in a battle, something would fall and break just when it shouldn't, and the ghost would hear him.
Velma was, of course, the smart one, the analytical one, the scientist and so forth. Could always come up and said, we can see that the Chinese writing is really, if you hold it up to the mirror, it's says something and so forth.
If I remember my ancient Aztec, these inscriptions say this room is dedicated to the moon goddess.
Freddie's the leader, and he was the guy that came up with the Rube Goldberg, kind of contraptions and so forth. That character started off, I think his name was Jeff, and then he became Harvey, and then all of a sudden Fred came in and said he was going to be Fred. So I guess he had something to do with that. And while this is going on back and forth, the design guys will start working on the characters and coming up with the look of the characters and the dog.
Well, Hanna-Barbera had these a number of wonderful artists working for them. They had this little creative brain trust that had Jerry Eisenberg and Alex Toth, and also Iwo Takamoto, who became kind of the head stylist and art director for the studio. And what Iwo did was come up with designs for a lot of the characters that were simple, and yet the characters have life and they have expression.
From a visual standpoint, I use an approach in which I would use almost a geometric series of shapes that I felt that they were talking about in their description of the characters. For instance, Fred was a V because he was sort of athletic, broad-shouldered, and etc. And the S curves for Daphne, who was supposed, who was sort of narcissistic in her feelings about style and etc. And Velma was almost a square or a rectangle because I wanted her to have a feeling of solidity and stability because she was supposed to be the intellectual in the crowd. And of course, all you had to do is add the horn-rimmed glasses to it, and there she was. Shaggy was the beatnik of the group, and so his shape was that sort of droopy build and stance on him and had him sort of shuffle and hang his arms loosely to his side and made his clothes a bit oversized. And it was the beatnik or hippie version of the teenager of that time.
We said, well, what kind of a dog are we going to have in this show? And we were saying, well, it's going to either be a great big dog or a little feisty dog. And we went with a great big goofy dog, because it's more fun to have a big, goofy dog.
The Great Dane was supposed to be the biggest dog around. And there was a woman that actually bred and reared Great Danes. So she came over and spent a solid hour describing all the positive things about what makes a prize-winning Great Dane. And I selected about 5 things, I think, and went in the opposite direction. For instance, a good, strong, straight back. So I sloped his back. A strong chin. So I underslung his chin. I lifted the eyes so that they became sort of human-structured eyes and very heavy brows, so the animators can use them to emphasize certain expressions. And I think a straight hind legs, I think she mentioned, so I bowed them. And I thought I could get a very funny duck waddle when he walked.
But the rule was this: the kids wouldn't buy into it if the monsters were silly. The bad guys were always real.
We concentrated on making it as scary and as dark as possible, and would stylize the lighting on the backgrounds.
So it had like a haunted mansion in the background, and it's dark and spooky, and there was a big ghoul and something like that.
When I went to present the idea to the top management of CBS, along with the whole fall schedule, and bear in mind that this program, Who's Scared, was the centerpiece of the whole show, and that without it, we really had no schedule. And I went up there, and Frank Stanton, who was president then, a very somber man, said, "That's too violent. We can't put that on the air."
They were scared to death. They went, "We can't put this on the air. It's too frightening for these kids." Every parent in America was going to call in and say, "Why are you giving my kid nightmares?"
And I said, "Well, my Lord, what am I going to do? Without this show, we have no schedule." And so I called up Joe, and I said, "Get everybody together at the studio. We really got to regroup on this thing." So I booked a flight on the red eye, and as we were approaching Los Angeles and landing, a light bulb went off, and I said, "We'll take that dog, we'll move him center stage, make him the star of the show, and call the show Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?"
So he came back and he says, Scooby-Doo is the name. It's the name of the dog, and it's the name of the show, and he's the star and the whole thing.
It was the same basic concept. Do the same horror stories, and they were very, very scary. But what softened the entire thing was the fact that you had this big buffoonish dog, and he was the equivalent of Costello in the Abbott and Costello movies. The dog saved the show. Without the dog, there would be no Scooby-Doo.
Jinkies! Jeepers!
Zoinks! Come on, gang. Let's split up and look for more clues.
Quick, do something, Scoob!
Well, in many cases, they're much younger children who don't understand that there are real people behind the character voices. And so